Lee, good to see you.
Great to see you, Evan. How are you?
Oh man, it's been a minute, but I'm so glad we got to get together today. This is great.
Yes, it took us a while, but we're here and I'm really excited. I love what Beautify Earth has done, is doing, and the mission. You've positively impacted lots of people. And of I don't do many podcasts, but actually you're someone I'm really excited to speak with because I think there's a lot of common ground between the mission of Global Street Art and what Beautify Earth does. We can talk about all of that, but over to you, sir.
Yeah, I mean, we got started this, I think, pretty similarly, and over a decade ago, I know for
Yep.
me and you as well. I think we were both sort of like on that starting around that cusp when street art was, we were pushing street art early before it was becoming this like almost like it's pretty popular now as a means of change. But we started with this like, let's beautify the world kind of thing. Every wall should be beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautified cities, right? That's sort of the way we see the world. And we started that together and and here we are over a decade later, still doing this.
Absolutely. I mean, we started with a mission to live in painted cities. It's still there. It's really interesting how we made that sustainable through us. That includes things like hand painted advertising, working with brands in a very commercial manner, but then also working with developers and landlords for commission murals that are not advertising, but they're, as they'd be called, placemaking. But then we've also really from the start, and even before we had that model, we really leaned into the community side of what we were doing. And we're probably at 3,000 pure art, non-commercial murals supported since then. We've done, I think this year so far, we've painted around 35 commercial murals already, but we're at 86 non-commercial murals. So the ability of us to do one, or rather the fact that we do one, really supports the other, and especially allows us to do that, the community stuff, on our own terms. So we've always had the community side and the commercial side, and there's an interplay between them that is it talks a lot about public space, obviously, because they're not on this. Well, actually, sometimes they are on the same walls, and we've developed models where we'll paint some mural walls commercially for some months a year, and then for community purposes, paid for by that commercial stuff for other months a year. We've got a lot of different models across the estate that we look after and the walls that we're painting to be able to try and find the interplay between those areas.
Yeah, and I know, I guess similarly, we've had that sort of this multi-model approach and schools, giving back to the schools and having, now we have a nonprofit and a for-profit kind of
Yep.
doing both sides of this equation.
Yep.
It's been tricky because of that it's such a good thing, but at the same time, there's a corporate element to it. And the goal is to kind of blend those a bit in a way, because let's be honest, corporations have money that they want to spend and relate and get in touch with people. And for us, it's been, how do we put that money into communities successfully and kind
Yep.
of thread that needle and kind of and bridge that gap a bit, which I think it's not just like, okay, it's corporate and it's nonprofit. There is a blend. How do you
Yeah, absolutely.
do that?
Well, I mean, there's different ways that you can work, and different models work in different countries. Our public funding for the arts is, when either it's not great or we're not very good at accessing it. And we didn't start with a way, we don't have grant writers. We struggled to find ways to make ourselves sustainable. So our early models were things like gallery shows. We thought about iPad apps. We did book publishing, and no one does paid for street art apps now. The world has really changed over the last 10 years, but brands or companies are the predominant financial institutions of our time. And certainly for a US and UK model, I think there are some areas where that funding is really appropriate. and brands that, like we work sometimes with paint companies, and people producing like paint pens. So both Pilot Paint Pen Company and Posca in the UK, and they sponsor different events. That's a really natural alignment, and artists are using those anyway. Now, that's a really simple model, but we also work with other companies like Google, for example, who produce really interesting technologies that artists are using, and artists demonstrate how to use them, that take an experience from being a mural and then adding something else on top of it. Those kind of technologies are really like natural extensions. And a lot of brands are looking to produce and make content by supporting culture, and street art is really visual. So that, the attraction of that makes a lot of sense. Like the attraction of working with artists for brands makes a lot of sense, because it helps them reach different audiences. It helps them reach their own audience in like new and engaging ways. But the conversation is usually, where the criticism can sit is usually about authenticity. And if the brand's mission and values make sense, and they're promoting the way that they're working with artists is genuine, then better things tend to happen as a result of that, or there's like more integrity in the project. And the projects that artists increasingly, because brands want to work with them, the more successful artist gets, the more options that they have for who they will and won't work with. And those principles that artists have, who they will and won't work with, and the circumstances under that, artists have been really empowered over the last decade to be able to work increasingly on their own terms with brands, and not work with brands as well. So certain brands. So I think those things are really, valuable, and it's important to have principles, but those principles only really count for something when they cost you money, right? So otherwise it's very easy to say. Now, we're quite explicit that like the thing that has made our business most sustainable is hand painted advertising, and that's partly a real estate model. There was a lot of reticence in the UK and other countries as well. I think when that started 10 years ago, it started earlier with like Colossal in the US, and I think it was better known. But I think the fact that so many artists have been able to make a living and sustain themselves by painting large scale stuff outdoors has supported a lot of people. And I think because there's been that ability for artists, often who've come from a graffiti background, to be able to make a living out of doing something like that, has supported a lot of people to live a career as close to, as an artist, but also, has also provided opportunities for collaboration, where increasingly, like, it'll be an artist using their own design style to work with a brand as well. So there's a lot of different models, and some work better than others. Like I said, the hand-painted advertising that we do also then helps us support the other areas of the not business but organization, to be able to help our Art for Estates program, our building sites program, which works on construction hoarding. So we've got a series of programs that are pure art, and there's some really simple parts of like the circular economy that I think are kind of useful to know. We work predominantly in spray paint. If you're going to work with spray paint, when you go to an HPA, hand painted advertising, a site, and you're painting, you have paint left over that you can't take onto the next project. Well, it actually costs more to recycle that, because you need a dedicated waste carrier, and it's clearly wasteful if it's a half full can. So that material being given away to artists to paint for fun, to paint the States, to paint wherever, supports other art. So there's a lot of like materials, skill, and equipment that was funded by the commercial, that then goes on to help the community.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of good things in there. The last one is a bit around the just responsibility with painting too, right? There's a bit of a sustainability, regenerative, repurposing, reimagining, but really sticking to trying to be pure and responsible in how we do things as well. And thinking, I'm going to use the word sustainably, because I think that's the buzzword that will be most relevant to most people, but just what you do with your cans, for example. right? That
Yeah.
impacts your business in order to be responsible.
Yeah. I mean, it seemed like a natural, I think, look, you will know that without funding from somewhere, art's difficult. You have to be able to make a living to do it. Otherwise, it's a hobby, and that's fine as well. But the more people that are able to sustain their lifestyle and to make a living by making art in any guise, the more of it gets to happen. And I felt in the early stages, particularly, that because the resource available for the kinds of artists that we predominantly work with was so low, that just by adding small amounts of resource enabled us to have an outsized impact. So, we've helped organize, in terms of non-commercial art, 2,500, 3,000 murals since 2012. And, we want to reach a point where ultimately we inspire 1 million murals. And there's got to be a journey and a pathway to getting there. But when you're adding some resource to something where there was so little resource, you can have that outsized impact. And for the sake of like free paint, you get, we a lot of what we do for the Art for Estates project is matching artists that want to paint, and some are on our own team now. We increasingly adding different forms of resource to that, but there's some really great things that can happen because of the small amounts of resource we've been able to put towards that. When I say small, it's not that small, but small relative to, say, like the resources you get from a standard commercial project. But because there's so little other resource in there anyway, you get to have that outsized impact. We started with a belief, and it's one I still hold today, that you have a lot of artists that want to paint a city. You have a lot of the city, by which I mean landlords, more owners, and whoever else, that actually wants to be painted. And the bit that was struggling in the middle was just the conversation. So if you were just able to broker those relationships, some really nice things could happen. And in terms of sustainability, there's a lot of ways that you can think about it. But I think about the value that we give to a broader community. So, we have fancy coatings that are pollution removing that we can add to our murals, and we do that predominantly for brands because they have a cost and they want to do that. We also, we've been 110%. We offset more carbon than we produced for years. I'm never kind of convinced that being not climate positive instead of carbon neutral really makes a massive difference, but you should do it anyway. But that sustainability that I think about is more in terms of like the long-term health of the artist community. And the more people that can make a living out of doing that, even if they're while they're painting commercially 5 days a week and they want to paint for fun on the weekend, that's still a really powerful amount of time that those artists can go on and do something beautiful, but they have to be able to make a living first.
So let's lead that right into AI, because we're talking about really artist empowerment. I think both of our organizations have always wanted to really make sure that we think about the artists first. They don't get taken advantage of. They don't sign stupid contracts that put them under, right? Like looking out for them. And now AI is coming. Yeah. So I guess the question is how so AI is coming whether we like it or not, sort of how I see it. So the question I want to think about this in an opportunistic standpoint. How do we use AI to support artists in this way? Because it's coming and we want to protect them. We want to make sure they're being treated right and they can continue to do their great work. What do we do? How do we make sure that AI is responsibly empowering artists?
Oof, that's a huge question. So when yeah,
it is.
I've had quite a bit of time thinking about AI lately, so I'll probably lose my thread and apologize if I do, but there's a few parts of it that jump out to me. AI is not artificial. In fact, it's concentrated, not artificial. So every training set and data set was basically, each piece of data in that set was human. It was programmed by a human. It's a human algorithm over human data to produce something that we're calling artificial, but really it's concentrated human. That lack of, there's case studies, right? So some artists will use, Tristan Eaton's a great example. He has the Gemma project where he's able to use AI to generate artworks, and it's a real but it's based on his own data set. So he's using it because he owns it and he owns the output of it. And that's a really clever thing because as far as I can tell, it's ring fenced. So he's kind of protected, right?
Yes.
Where there's a real challenge is AI can crawl the web. And if you use something like Midjourney, to be perfectly honest, I don't know where Midjourney sources its imagery from, right? So, but let's say it's, you know, like ChatGPT is using basically the whole internet from 2021, 22, right? AI is taking a little bit from an awful lot of people, but there are ways in which artists will use it, right? So like designers use it very quickly for rapid prototyping, for supporting on mood boards, and that helps clients, that helps projects move faster, quicker, with lower cost to start, which levels a playing field, but it doesn't mean that everyone is all of a sudden a great designer. It doesn't mean that everyone has naturally got the eye. It just means everyone's got access to really powerful tools. Where there are problems, and I'm not seeing that this has been solved. I don't think smart contracts necessarily solve this. I don't think I'm not seeing how the blockchain would probably help this, but it's very easy for artists to have stuff essentially ripped off because AI can produce a derivative work or something that's very close to an artist's work, trained, is produced on a data set that is basically that artist's work. But what comes out of it is a remix. I think there are probably parallels with like early hip hop culture and sampling that create a legal framework that isn't yet being implemented in AI. But if you want to understand how to think about the future, there are usually parallels in the past that give you a decent paradigm for what that could look like. AI needs to be regulated. And there are a number of reasons why it needs to be regulated, and the protection of artworks, the protection of IP amongst them. But regulation is always slower than technology. So we are in a position where there is a major problem, and artists are really exposed.
Yeah. And look, that's a really good point. On my other podcast, I actually speak to one of our congressmen here in California about exactly that, how policy will always be slower than technology. And one day when we have augmented democracy, maybe it won't be. There's some good conversation around that. But because of that, it does put the pressure on organizations, on individuals to be responsible before the policy comes out and do the best we can.
The problem is, I think that fails because if like the problem is, if you have, for example, if you have two warring states or, a multipolar world, each of them for military purposes is mad if they don't develop AI because they know their enemies are, right? Or the threats are, even if they're not direct enemies. So it works similarly with organizations that if there is an unregulated environment, the ones that tend to pull away or get the advantage of that are the ones that are perhaps less responsible. And that's a problem. That's a major problem. It's why, unfortunately, when the drinks industry in the 1970s talked about plastic bottles, and they basically said that, this is an individual problem. The individual is not capable of solving that. Without regulation, there was not adequate. You can't leave it all up to the individual. This is where the state needs to have power, and the American system with, if we move to a position of away from large lobbying and large donations to small lobbying, we might be able to move forward. And, look, I don't need to go into this in too much detail. Everyone on the state side knows that the power that lobbying firms have in the US, and that's pretty unhealthy.
Yeah. Well, you're risking basically what you're risking is a healthy policy, right? You want a healthy policy that's really thinking about the best possible solution for the most amount of people. That generally doesn't happen with all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes or whatever. But we have, in the meantime, what are we going to do to protect and continue to keep I guess the word, just to kind of rope it back in, is authenticity, right?
Yeah,
There's culture and there's authenticity, and AI has a great power to be supportive in this. It
yeah,
also has a great power to be disruptive if we're not careful, and we need to
that's going
maintain
to
that
happen.
authenticity.
That's going to happen. I think one of the, you know, for years there's already been robots that can paint walls. There's mural printing robots that,
Oh
and
yeah,
there's several. There's house painting robots, there's mural painting robots, there's
those dot printer.
firms that do that.
It's yeah,
Yeah,
it's crazy.
essentially there's, but the value, the reason that I make the point that AI is a human algorithm, a human generated algorithm, and that there's all the human effort, like the history of human knowledge is your training set for AI, is because with AI, we're in danger of forgetting how good the human is or what the human component is. And one of the reasons why I feel relatively protected as a business because of how, I mean, we will end up painting murals that have been images generated by AI without a shadow of a doubt. And it'll probably happen this year, right? We've had briefs that are things like that for years. It doesn't surprise me that it happens. But the fact that we hand paint is a celebration of human talent and skill. And the more other, let's say other forms of advertising, other forms of like digital art, the more that other stuff moves towards AI, the more I see the cultural value in doing the thing that's human powered, just as a reminder that we are human, and ultimately the people buying the stuff the companies sell, the people that are consuming street art, the people that are sharing street art are human. And we're going to need to remember the good things that humans and humanity are capable of in a world where AI is more prevalent.
Yeah, well
And
said.
that's why I love what we do, because, and it's not, I don't hate AI. I think there's some amazing tools and amazing things that can be done with it, but I really love humans. And the fact that humanity is so, that we're going to need to remember how we got here, and remember, it's a legitimate question. People are already asking questions like, what is the value of the human in an AI world? Why do we care about carbon-based life forms if all of a sudden we're going to move towards silicon? It's like, well, I don't think we're a relic. I don't think we're irrelevant. And I don't really think the question is it human versus AI? It's human plus AI versus human without AI, right? In a design sense, or like I can give you a context why, because that's a statement that could easily be misconstrued. But if you take like a designer who has AI tools, they're going to do, versus a designer that just doesn't or refuses to engage with it. There is a reason that the person that refuses to engage with it will be valued for doing different things, but because they're not because they're not working with AI, that would need to be the selling point. Or that would need to be the reason that someone works with them. Otherwise, it's just a tool, and human plus tool is usually more powerful than human without tool.
Yeah, there's an analogy here, I think, with vinyl, that I've
Yeah,
always had, right? Vinyl wrapping, where this always came to people like, oh, should we paint or should we do vinyl? There are benefits of vinyl, but authentic hand paint is not one of them. And there's something about the soul. I'm going to use the word soul that goes into putting your effort, your mind, your heart into a piece of material that you can then see, and you've touched that material. That's why volunteer days on some of these things are so nice, because people feel that they've changed a thing, and that feeling is conveyed when you paint, and also for the people who experience it. And that's the difference here when we're talking about, I think, and that's why I'm making this analogy, is because vinyl's very effective. It's got a lot of great uses. But it does take a little bit of that creation, that you were responsible for that creation, and that
yeah,
has soul and authenticity, and it took labor and sweat to make it, and it's
yeah.
not just a design and a print and a glue. So I think this is a relevant analogy that I've experienced before AI was how I responded to this.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points to say in response to that. I don't think skills are ever going to be uncool or ever go out of fashion. And it doesn't matter that you could vinyl wrap a wall, and it doesn't matter that you could print a mural on a wall. How much more impressive is the end product because someone sweated to do it, but it's not the sweat of just doing it, but it's the years it took them to get the skill and the craft. And
Sure.
AI is not craft, and it cannot be craft because it's not human. And if you want to celebrate that element of craft, well, you can't do that with AI, right? That's the point. It's the antithesis of it. But at the same time, there's an irony in this, which is, and you see it especially in hand painted advertising, that one of the reasons that it partly, like, all advertising used to be painted. Well, that stopped because of vinyl, right? You know, a livery that you would find on like delivery vans, it was all painted. That became vinyl lettering. Billboards were, you know, prior to posters. Well, posters have been around a long time, but large scale murals prior to vinyl were all painted, and in some countries around the world, yeah, parts of India and parts of Bangladesh, like there's still so much of the advertising is hand painted, and that never went away. Well, it's kind of funny in Europe and the US that one of the reasons for a resurgence in hand painted advertising, and I'm really just talking about the commercial stuff, not just the street art, but this affects street art as well, is content. So because of a technology of sharing and the technology of sharing digital content, you know, that is one of the main reasons that street art, and certainly hand painted advertising as well, became that much more popular. Because it used to be that the street art you would see was only in your neighborhood, and then all of a sudden the street art that you would see was coming through your Facebook feed or your Instagram, and now it's like you're seeing the artist make the video on TikTok. All of that has allowed people to see higher quality stuff and know how good painting can be, and that's been really important in making new advocates for street art. Because if you were a councillor or you were a local landlord and the only street art that you'd ever seen was in a 10-block radius or whatever that was, or like was just local, and you don't know how good it can be, you're less likely to say yes to having your own building painted. But because you've seen everything that came out of Wynwood and the hundreds of other street art festivals around the world, that social media has really allowed people to understand what the human is capable of and helped it find new audiences and new supporters and new fans, which has really helped bump an industry up. So, yeah, you know, there's an irony in there as well, which is we're talking about human skills, but it's supply, you know, it's so much more popular because of technology, because publishing costs drop with social media.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And one of the things I think that you harped on briefly was just the idea that, like, this is content, you know. Yeah. The street art becomes, first you have a design, depending on the, you know, the contract with the artist, you can use that design for lots of things. It's as if you went and hired a designer to make you a cool piece of art for your brand. And now you could chop that up, put it in your billboards, put it on your posters. Actually, we had a client who did that quite well. It was a co-working space here across campus that I was at for a while, actually. And they started using this piece for their website, because they have the digital piece and the colors and the theme, and it became who they were. So essentially what they did was for the price of a mural, it was a brand exercise for them. Which I thought was really, really cool. And the repurposing, and then you paint it. That's just the beginning. And then it goes on the wall, and now you've got videos, and you could do all sorts of cool stuff in front of the wall. So the level of opportunity around art, especially for brands who really want to use it, I think is huge and way more than it's ever been.
And absolutely. And look, technology is also the reason that artists have direct access to their own audiences, and why the gallery model was completely upended. And now, I mean, I'm lucky. I'm in many respects, I'm very lucky I'm not an artist, because I think a lot of galleries also judge, especially younger artists or people that aren't established have come via a street route, say, or a mural painting route, by their following. You know, there's a pressure to be a really good self-publisher and publicist. And I think that was probably always there, because it's, you know, some of the artists that make the best livings may not, or have sell the most, may not be the best artists. They're just they may be the ones that are the best at publishing stuff that's hopefully quite good.
Oh, in fact, I'd say that's quite usually the truth. The best artists have yet to be discovered.
Yeah, right. And I think that also, you know, and that unsurprisingly has a lot of knock-on effects, that there's a lot of artists in the world making pretty derivative, pretty banal works,
Oh yeah.
that are like a kind of a rehash of stuff that's been seen before. There's so many artists who have taken Mr. Brainwash and just essentially replicated that in one way or another, but it gets shared really well. And, you know,
they're marketing people. They're not necessarily creators, imaginative creationists. They're great. They know how to configure, and that's a form of art. There's all varieties of varieties of this. But the people who are, say, a 10 at a skill tend not to be 10s at the other things also. There's well-balanced people. Some people tend to be, you know, 6s and 7s and 8s at lots of things, but those people who are like truly exceptional, you want to grab and throw out of the world, probably are not the best marketing people or know how to start a business, you know?
There's a Warhol quote that my mum sent me this morning, which is art is whatever you can get away with. And, you know, there is some truth in that as well. I think one of the, our memories get a little bit fuzzy. And I came from a b-boy background. I was breakdancing for a long time. I stopped in my mid-20s when I hurt my knee, but I was in that scene in the early 2000s when video sharing moved from VHS to DVD, and you would have to go to Deal Real Records in central London to pick up badly copied VHS tapes to understand how people were dancing on the other side of the world. But that information was hard to come by. So that led to like an economy of like, it wasn't just who was the most creative, but who had access to the best information for training purposes. And YouTube homogenized, or rather leveled the playing field for who could get what information. One of the challenges that brings is isolation is really good for creativity. If you're not influenced by other people or a very limited set of people, you have more opportunity to take your own path and go further and further and do something that is kind of weirder and weirder. But if you're online and bombarded by the same images as everyone else, it tends to pull you back to this average of what everyone else is doing as well. So, you know, I think AI, there's a lot, you can kind of, there's a style of images, there's a homogeneity en masse of a lot of the AI generated images that I'm seeing as well, where they kind of look and feel in the same sort of airbrushed way, or like, it's not that you can tell. You get a sense if something is AI generated or not. Ultimately, I could be fooled as easily as the next person, but the creativity in isolation is going to be even that bit harder in an AI environment.
Yeah. Well, I think it's awesome that, you know, I'm listening to you speak and I just feel like I could say the same words that are coming out of your mouth. I could say them and I would feel like they authentic in saying them, like they were coming out of my mouth. And it just goes to show how here we are on two sides of the world, but doing this for more than a decade. And we're like just seeing things the same way, speaking the same language. And a lot of the problems we have and a lot of the, you know, the things that are happening in the world affect us both, and how we think about them is just so similar. How we work with corporations, how we want to give back to community, how we want to think about the artists first, make a difference, turn the world into something beautiful. And it's always so comforting to talk to you and see that like we're fighting the same fight here. And, you know.
And you know what? And I think there's something that I've noticed on our journeys that I still really feel now, which is we're still figuring this out. Right. I still feel that there's a much further to go and there's so much to learn, but I can express opinions passionately, but I'm not sure that I always hold them so strongly either. Right. I'm open to change my mind on quite a lot of, there's some core principles that cannot change. The mission to live in painted cities of us will not change. You know, the fact that we are so involved and want to support our community will not change. But there's some ways about how we work with brands and what kind of projects we would take on and how we do that, where we're still figuring that out and not everything is kind of crystallized. And it's in those areas of uncertainty that I find some of the most interesting challenges and conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we both know that the world is going to be a much better place when it's colorful, positive, inspirational, artistic, and people can walk around and experience themselves. And all of these different challenges are just paths to getting there. I still see plenty of walls just everywhere that I'm just like, why would you leave your wall like that? It's just terrible. Just do something. Paint a circle on it. It's better than doing nothing.
And I think this is the thing we can so easily forget. When you've worked with amazing artists and you have painted 1,000 walls and you've been up lifts and you know what it takes to do that, you know how possible it is to transform that wall with that circle or whatever the artwork is. And I think a podcast like, you know, this conversation, if there's some people seeing it that have a blank wall that haven't figured out, that there are people that can help and people they can speak with to make that happen. And I think that's something that I don't want to lose track of, because I see walls and I feel that in the same way, but I don't want to lose the fact that I don't know the person who owns it. I don't know what they're thinking. They may have other things. They may not. It's not their priority. And I think, you know, that is one of the things that, like, art flourishes in moments of peace, right? Art flourishes when there's space to do so, when people can slow down, when cultures can meet and cultures can mix, and they can and people can have that conversation. And that is a real privilege that, like, we are able to be in this position to work with artists to have those impacts. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't wake up thinking that, even the days I bloody hate and everything's difficult and I've got this much work but this much capacity and it's absolutely crushing me, there's nothing else I want to do, and I couldn't be more grateful. I can't imagine anything else I could do in the world that would make me more grateful than what I'm doing now.
Oh man, amen. That's a beautiful way to cap this, and I mean, it's so well said, and I think you've articulated a lot of great points that people need to hear. So with that, I want to thank you for, I mean, this was wonderful. It was great seeing you, great chatting with you. And here's to more painted cities.
Here's to more painted cities. Evan, thank you so much.
All right. Take care.